Are you feeling something discreetly changing in America's job market, even if you're not the one sending out resumes anymore? Maybe it's the stories you hear from your children, the uncertainty in your relatives' voices, or the quiet way companies seem to talk about pausing hiring. I had those same questions, and you are not wrong. Something is shifting not suddenly but slowly and deeply, because on the surface everything appears steady. The unemployment rate stood at 4.4% in September 2025, still low by historical standards. Weekly jobless claims recently dropped to a 7-month low, suggesting we are far from a mass layoff moment. And wages after several difficult years are finally rising a little faster than inflation. Yet underneath the signals are different. Large employers announced more than 153,000 layoffs in October, alone the highest October figure in 22 years. Hiring pipelines have thinned. Competition has grown sharper. This video looks directly at that quiet divide, the stable numbers on paper, and the uneasy reality so many American families feel right now. What the official numbers actually say. Before we go any deeper, we need to understand what is happening at the surface. The picture may seem straightforward, echoing what we mentioned at the start. Yet once you examine the numbers closely, a more layered and complex reality begins to appear. The unemployment rate stood at 4.4% in September 2025, a figure that still sits comfortably within what economists consider a stable range. It is higher than the lows seen during the heated post-pandemic rebound, but not by much. In a country of more than 300 million people, a rate in the mid-4s signals that most workers who want jobs still hold them. Weekly jobless claims support that picture. Through late 2025, filings fell to a 7-month low, a sign that employers are not releasing large numbers of workers. The rhythm of layoffs, at least in the official system, remains steady. Most people who had a job a month ago have it today. From this vantage point, the labor market appears steady, almost uneventful. Wage data adds another layer. After several years in which prices rose faster than pay, real earnings have finally begun to move ahead. The improvement is modest yet noticeable. Workers saw increases that outpaced inflation through much of 2025. For many households, this marks the first stretch of regained purchasing power since the pandemic disruptions. Even though the cumulative losses from 2021 to 2024 have not been fully reclaimed, the direction has turned upward. Job creation has not stalled either. Growth continues in specific pockets of the economy, particularly in healthcare, government roles, and leisure and hospitality. These sectors account for the bulk of net new positions added this year. Hospitals, clinics, home care agencies, public institutions, and service-driven businesses still post openings at a steady pace. They are the anchors keeping total employment from slipping backward. Yet a glance at corporate announcements introduces a different detail. In October 2025, major employers disclosed plans for over 153,000 job cuts, the highest October figure in 22 years. These are not immediate mass firings. Announced cuts often stretch across several quarters. They do, however, signal that large organizations are reassessing their staffing levels and preparing for a leaner period. This number stands out precisely because the official layoff data has remained quiet. It is an early indicator of recalibration at the top of the corporate hierarchy. Taken together, these measurements form the surface map of the American labor market. Unemployment remains low. Layoff claims remain contained. Wage growth edges forward. Job creation continues, though concentrated in fewer sectors. Announced cuts rise but have not yet fed directly into the weekly claim system. The overall impression is one of controlled movement rather than turbulence. This map, however, has limits. National unemployment rates capture only those who are actively searching. They do not reflect discouraged workers who stepped away from the market. Weekly claims track those removed from payrolls, not those who struggle to enter in the first place. Wage data, helpful as it is, says little about how unevenly gains are distributed. Sector-level growth hides the thinness of opportunities in other fields. Announced layoffs mark intentions rather than immediate outcomes. Each metric tells a truth, but never the whole truth. What the data does show is a labor market that has not cracked. Jobs still exist, and most workers continue in the roles they held earlier in the year. The country has avoided the sharp spikes that usually define recessions. It has also avoided the rapid hiring that characterized the recent boom. The landscape sits somewhere in between stable but not expansive. Understanding this surface is essential before moving any deeper. It sets the frame for everything that follows. The numbers outline a calm headline story, but the lived experience of job seekers, mid-career workers, and families across the country raises questions that these measurements cannot fully answer. 2. From a hot market to a low-hire, low-fire economy. First, we need to go back to the pandemic period. That stretch of time is painful to remember, yet it quietly set off a long ripple that reshaped how companies hire. When the economy reopened, employers faced shortages across nearly every industry. Millions of workers had shifted careers, relocated, or stepped away from the labor force. Businesses competed intensely for staff, pushed wages higher, and lowered requirements to bring people in quickly. Some HR directors now describe those years as the most aggressive hiring cycle in a generation. By 2021 and 2022, the pace accelerated. Restaurants reopened with half their former teams. Logistics firms needed drivers. Hospitals ran short of nurses and aides. Even white-collar employers loosened their expectations because the demand for labor outstripped supply. It was a moment when workers had leverage and companies moved fast to fill seats. The climate changed through 2023. Interest rates rose, costs tightened, and the urgency to expand eased. Recruiters began to see thinner headcount plans. One HR consultant described it this way: "The market didn't turn cold, it just lost its heat." Companies no longer hunted aggressively. They planned more cautiously and stretched existing teams a little further. By 2024 and into 2025, this pattern settled into a new shape. Many firms held on to their current employees but slowed the creation of new roles. The behavior became widespread enough that labor economists began calling it a low-hire, low-fire environment. Turnover decreased not because workers stayed by choice, but because switching roles became harder. Recruiters saw more applications per posting. Pipelines took longer to move. Internal approvals for new hires passed through more layers of management. The national data confirms this shift. While unemployment held at 4.4% in September 2025, the volume of new job postings declined. Many openings that once took a week to fill stayed active for months. HR leaders reported that candidate pools had grown heavier even for mid-range office positions. A director of talent for a regional firm noted, "You feel the caution every time you try to open a role. Budgets get reviewed 3 times instead of once." Layoff activity reflects the same restraint. Weekly jobless claims remained low, suggesting few workers were being released. Companies avoided broad cuts because replacing staff had become costly and disruptive. Instead of trimming their workforce quickly, they trimmed their hiring ambitions. The labor market held its structure, but the flow of new opportunities narrowed. This produced a landscape where the number of employed workers stayed high, yet mobility inside the market slowed. Sector differences deepened during this period. Healthcare maintained strong demand driven by an aging population and ongoing shortages. Leisure and hospitality continued to add roles as travel and services normalized. Government hiring expanded through state and local departments. These pockets carried the national job growth, but many other fields flattened. Office-based roles in administration, marketing support, finance support, customer operations, and tech-adjacent tasks saw fewer openings and longer waits between interviews. Inside many companies, the shift also affected working hours and workloads. Several Federal Reserve districts reported reductions in scheduled hours, rather than full eliminations of positions. Managers asked smaller teams to absorb more responsibilities. Vacant roles remained unfilled to control budgets. HR analysts described this as quiet, tightening a gradual adjustment rather than a single shock. The result is a labor market that appears steady, yet moves with less energy. Workers remain employed, but the pathways to change positions or find new roles have become narrower. Job seekers encounter heavier competition and slower responses. Even well-qualified candidates need more time to secure offers. Families sense uncertainty not because jobs are disappearing, but because new opportunities no longer arise as easily as they did during the rebound years. This shift in hiring behavior forms the foundation for the pressures felt across many households. The country is not facing a wave of layoffs. It is facing a landscape where companies choose caution, hold on to existing staff, and expand only when necessary. That change, quiet and gradual, shapes the experience of anyone trying to move within the job market today. 3. Why the job market feels tighter than the unemployment rate suggests. That leads us to an even bigger question: if most Americans still hold their jobs, why do so many families say life feels heavier, more fragile, and more uncertain than the national figures show? A large part of the answer lies in wages. Pay has begun to rise faster than inflation again, Yet the recovery arrived late. Through much of 2021 to 2023, inflation climbed between 6 and 9%, while average hourly earnings rose roughly 4 to 5%. Real wages slipped behind month after month. In 2025, real pay finally turned positive, but the gain was slight, around 1% in many sectors. For a household facing several years of eroded purchasing power, that improvement feels more like relief than progress. Many families describe the same sentiment: we're earning more, but it doesn't feel like we're getting ahead. The numbers confirm their experience. A small rise cannot erase years of lost ground. Household costs widen the gap. Rent pressures remain strong. Across major metro areas, rents increased between 4 and 7% in the past year. Home insurance premiums climbed even faster in some states, with increases reported in the double digits due to weather risks and rebuilding costs. Groceries, now on a higher base after the inflation wave, still post yearly increases of 3 to 4%. Health insurance premiums for employer plans rose roughly 6% in 2025, adding weight to monthly budgets already stretched. Utility costs, especially electricity and heating, continue to trend upward in several regions. These are not discretionary categories. Families cannot cut them without cutting essential living standards. A mother in Ohio summed it up plainly: "Our bills are steady, our pay is not." Underemployment adds another layer. The country counts a person as employed even if they are working fewer hours than they need. Millions of Americans fall into this category. The number of workers in part-time jobs while wanting full-time hours remains well above pre-pandemic levels. Many college-educated workers have shifted into service roles that pay less than their field of study would normally provide. Career progression has slowed too. Promotions in many companies are delayed as organizations tighten budgets. Workers who expected to move upward after several years now find themselves in the same position with heavier workloads and similar pay. These realities do not appear in the unemployment rate. They appear at the kitchen table when families calculate what they can postpone and what they must sacrifice. Job competition intensifies the strain. The volume of new postings has declined from the heights of 2022. Recruiters report that some openings now draw 2 to 3 times more applicants than they did during the hiring boom. Screening steps stretch longer. Candidates wait weeks between interviews. Skilled workers who once changed jobs confidently now hesitate because the path to a new role feels less certain. One HR manager noted that applicant pools for mid-range office roles have grown so sharply that a strong candidate can disappear into a stack of 100. For families, this slowdown is not abstract. When job searches stall, so does financial security. These pressures create a labor market that works on paper but pinches in daily life. A worker may keep their job, yet the cost of staying afloat rises faster than their pay. Another may want to switch positions only to find that fewer openings match their experience. A recent graduate may land interviews but receive no offers for months. An older employee may remain fully employed, yet lose the raise they counted on to keep up with rising expenses. None of these situations increase the unemployment rate, but each increases stress across American households. The contrast between the headline numbers and these everyday realities explains why so many families feel squeezed. The country has avoided a recession-style collapse in employment. What it faces instead is a period in which financial stability becomes harder to maintain even without job loss. The labor market still functions, but it no longer lifts families upward as easily as it once did. That quiet pressure, slow, cumulative, and deeply felt, is the core reason the job market feels tighter than the official figures suggest. 4. The quiet unraveling of remote work. In fact, the pandemic not only originated the idea of a low-hire, low-fire market, it also ignited the wave of remote work. When offices closed, millions of Americans shifted their entire working lives into their homes almost overnight. Companies adapted quickly, turning spare bedrooms and kitchen tables into temporary workstations that kept the economy running. For a time, remote work felt like a long-awaited breakthrough, a proof that many jobs did not need to be tied to a physical desk. As the country reopened, the system settled into a more balanced structure. Remote work did not disappear, but it no longer dominated. Hybrid work became the primary model. Surveys across several years show that among remote-capable workers, roughly 52% now split their week between home and office, 27% work fully remote, and 21% return to full-time on-site roles. This distribution reflects a compromise. Companies accept that flexibility improves retention, while workers accept that on-site presence supports collaboration and training. Hybrid work holds certain advantages over fully remote arrangements. Teams report clearer communication when colleagues meet in person at least once or twice a week. New employees absorb workplace norms faster. Mentorship, troubleshooting, and complex discussions often unfold more efficiently when people share the same room. Many managers say hybrid offers the best of both worlds: structure without rigidity, flexibility without isolation. In contrast, fully remote roles sometimes struggle with visibility. Workers can deliver results but miss the subtle interactions that influence promotions or long-term opportunities. By 2024 and 2025, a quiet shift took shape. Companies introduced fixed anchor days, often 2 or 3 days in the office. Some firms linked performance evaluations to in-person presence. Job postings for fully remote roles declined by 40 to 60% from their pandemic peak. While employers rarely described these moves as reversals, the effect was unmistakable. Remote work receded and hybrid tightened into a firmer expectation. This change carries practical consequences. Commuting costs have climbed since fuel prices and parking fees increased in several urban centers. Many families face higher childcare expenses, which now rise between 5 and 7% each year. Electricity, heating, and transit services continue trending upward. These costs fall heaviest on households that reorganized their lives around remote work and now must adjust again. For workers with health concerns or disabilities, the return of in-office requirements adds strain. Remote work once reduced exposure to illness, allowed for rest between tasks, and cut hours spent in transit. Hybrid schedules still offer some protection, but not the full safety net remote work once provided. Older parents, caregivers, and workers living far from urban cores face greater logistical burdens as they manage longer drives, unpredictable traffic, and higher city center rents. The numbers do not capture these pressures. A person required to commute twice a week remains employed in the national statistics. The data does not measure the lost hours spent on the road, the cost of childcare extended to match office timelines, or the fatigue that builds when family routines are reshaped. Employment remains steady, yet comfort declines. Stories like that of Michael Reyes, a 46-year-old technical support worker from Arizona, illustrate the shift. During the pandemic, his fully remote job allowed him to support his 2 children while caring for his aging mother. He managed calls, solved customer issues, and trained new staff entirely from home. When his employer introduced mandatory office days in late 2024, the role became harder to maintain. The commute stretched nearly an hour each way, and the company eventually restructured his team, prioritizing workers who lived closer to the office. Michael now looks for a more stable occupation, but fully remote openings have dried up in his field. Hybrid roles require commuting he cannot manage daily. "I used to have a system that worked," he says. "Now I'm piecing things together week by week." Remote work has not vanished, but its retreat has reshaped the daily realities of many families. The model that once offered flexibility, safety, and balance now exists in a narrower form. And the transition reveals a truth that employment data cannot reflect stability depends not only on having a job, but on how that job fits into a life. 5. Who is bearing the real weight of today's job market? Eventually, all of those shifts boil down to one aching problem: who is in the most devastating pain now? The labor market looks stable from afar, yet the strain is not shared evenly. We can divide those affected into 3 major clusters, each facing a different form of pressure. Their challenges overlap, but the impact hits their lives in distinct ways. The first cluster is young workers. They step into an economy where entry-level positions have thinned out and competition has intensified sharply. Job postings that once welcomed new graduates now list 2 or 3 years of required experience. Recruiters note that junior administrative roles regularly attract double or triple the number of applicants compared with 2021. Career counselors at several universities say the same thing: students are qualified, but the openings are fewer than the number trying to enter. Young workers are not losing jobs, they are struggling to begin. Many accept short-term roles outside their field simply to stay afloat. Some delay moving out, delay repaying loans, or move between part-time assignments. The unemployment rate does not register these stalled beginnings, yet they accumulate in households across the country. The second cluster consists of mid-career workers, often in white-collar roles that once provided a stable ladder upward. These workers encounter a different problem, not a lack of work, but a lack of movement inside the work. Corporate structures have tightened. Internal promotions slow down as companies freeze non-essential roles. Hiring managers describe applicant pools for mid-range positions as unusually heavy, with many postings receiving over 100 submissions. Skills that were once optional digital tools, automation literacy workflow software, are now treated as baseline requirements. AI introduces another layer of pressure. It absorbs repetitive tasks, merges responsibilities, and blurs traditional job boundaries. Workers who once handled routine documentation, scheduling, or support functions now share those tasks with automated systems. A staffing director at a large insurance firm stated, "The job isn't gone, but the pathway above it is narrower. Mid-career employees support families, mortgages, medical bills, and tuition. When their roles stagnate, the entire household feels it. They remain employed, but the predictability that once defined midlife working years has weakened." The final cluster is older workers, particularly those over 50. They face a delicate position in a labor market that values adaptability, speed, and ongoing retraining. After losing a job, many in this age group take longer to re-enter the workforce than younger peers. Employers rarely cite age directly, but resume reviewers quietly prioritize candidates who appear easier to train or less expensive to onboard. A human resources specialist in the Midwest described it plainly. "Once you pass 50, the margin for error gets smaller. One gap on a resume raises more questions." These workers confront digital skills expectations that evolved rapidly over the last 5 years. Even when they learn new tools, the preference for younger candidates and fast-paced teams remains a barrier. On top of that, older workers often carry responsibilities that make job loss harsher, caring for aging parents, supporting adult children during their own job struggles, or managing rising medical costs. A delayed re-entry into the workforce strains financial plans built over decades. The unemployment rate does not capture how deeply a 3-month job search can disrupt someone's retirement timeline or drain their savings. Sector divisions intensify these struggles. Healthcare continues to expand, adding tens of thousands of roles each month. Leisure and hospitality also grow as travel rebounds. But office-based sectors, administrative functions, tech support roles, marketing assistants, customer operations show slow creation of new positions. Workers trained for these fields often find themselves outside the sectors that are hiring most aggressively. Economists describe this as a fit problem, not a job shortage. Positions exist, but not where many professionals spent their careers. The mismatch pushes some toward lower-paying service roles or pushes them out of the labor market for extended periods. Across these 3 clusters, the common thread is not job loss, but reduced mobility. Young workers cannot enter easily. Mid-career workers cannot move upward readily. Older workers cannot re-enter smoothly. The result is a labor market that remains intact, yet feels unforgiving in its details. Stability exists, but opportunity has thinned. For millions of families, that thinning, not a crisis, creates the heaviest pain. 6 AI and automation, the real impact. If you think that is the whole big picture of the American job market, then no. We have not brought one important variable into the calculation. You may already sense it. Yes, it is artificial intelligence. AI's effect is not some distant scenario. It is happening in daily routines, in email threads, and back-office systems, in the quiet shifts that alter how work is structured. The transformation does not appear in the national unemployment rate, yet it changes the rhythm of countless workplaces across the country. The first visible change is the displacement of routine tasks. Research from major institutions shows that up to 30% of work hours in many white-collar roles are made of activities considered easily automatable documentation. Inbox triage, summarizing meetings, drafting reports, verifying forms, and scheduling. Generative tools used inside companies now produce standard templates in seconds. Chat systems handle a portion of customer questions that once required support staff. A survey of medium and large firms found that over 80% are testing or deploying AI in operations. These tools do not eliminate entire jobs, but they compress the tasks inside them. When tasks shrink, roles themselves compress. Job descriptions that once listed 10 or 12 responsibilities now retain only the most complex half. Repetitive duties drift to automated systems. The remaining work requires judgment, communication, and technical adaptability. This narrows the need for support layers. A staffing director in Chicago described it simply, "Where we used to need 5 people, we can now run the same workflow with 3. The role remains, but the ladder above it becomes steeper with fewer rungs and fewer clear paths upward." Hiring patterns reflect this recalibration. Companies hold on to current employees but slow down additions. They can maintain output with smaller teams, reducing the urgency to create new positions. Fully remote postings in AI-exposed sectors have already fallen 40 to 60% from their pandemic highs. Administrative support, customer operations, and clerical roles show declining new openings year over year. Job postings in these categories last longer, not because there are more roles to fill, but because employers refine requirements to match a market where AI handles part of the workflow. Workers feel the change most sharply in expectations. Many describe a faster pace and higher precision demanded from them. A report from several business associations notes that over 60% of employees in AI-integrated workplaces feel pressure to work smarter without clear guidance on what that means. This pressure builds quietly as deadlines tighten and oversight tools track productivity more closely. Amid these shifts, individual stories reveal the human cost. Rachel Kim, a 42-year-old claims processing specialist in Colorado, describes how her workload has changed over the last 2 years. For more than a decade, she reviewed documents, manually verified information, and contacted clients for missing details. In 2024, her company introduced an AI claims engine that now handles the first layer of review. The system flags cases, drafts responses, and analyses discrepancies. Rachel still works, but her queue has thinned, and the tasks left are higher complexity. She says, "I'm not being pushed out, but every month I feel the work shifting away from my hands." She applies for internal transfers, but many openings require software skills she is still learning. Her job remains, yet the ground beneath it feels less secure. AI also reshapes the broader job market. Sectors less vulnerable to automation, healthcare, hospitality, government, continue to add roles steadily. Jobs requiring physical presence, direct care, or hands-on service grow even as office-based tasks shrink. In contrast, industries leaning heavily on digital tools experience a different pattern, not mass layoffs, but restrained expansion. Teams stay stable in size while new roles emerge slowly and selectively. Opportunities exist in data operations, cybersecurity, AI oversight, and compliance, but they demand upskilling. Many workers face a gap between their current abilities and the technical requirements of these upcoming positions. Some manage the transition. Others struggle to find time or resources for retraining. AI has not erased millions of jobs. It has rewritten how work flows through companies, who handles which tasks, and how teams grow or stall. The unemployment rate remains low, but the lived reality is shifting. Jobs stay while certainty fades. 7. The structural forces tightening the labor market. By now, you may wonder, what is the root of all this? Since when did the labor market turn into its current shape? The answer lies not in a single event, but in a group of slow-moving structural forces that have been reshaping the American workforce for years. These forces operate quietly beneath the surface, and they determine why the job market feels heavier, even when the headline numbers appear calm. The first force is demographics. The United States is entering a period of historically slow growth in its working-age population. The group aged 20 to 64 is expanding at one of the lowest rates in decades. Retirements accelerated after the pandemic, with millions leaving the workforce earlier than expected due to health concerns, financial reassessment, or shifts in family obligations. Birth rates remain low, reducing the pipeline of future workers. These demographic trends squeeze the labor supply. Fewer young people enter, while older workers exit in larger numbers. This creates pressure on remaining workers, who carry a heavier share of economic activity. A second force is immigration patterns, which shape labor supply in critical ways. Immigration fell sharply during the early pandemic years, then rebounded unevenly in 2024 and 2025. Some sectors rely strongly on immigrant labor, especially healthcare support, food services, logistics, and certain skilled trades. When immigration flows contract, those industries experience immediate shortages. When inflows surge, the increase does not distribute evenly. Some states feel relief, others see little change. Visa processing delays continue to affect healthcare, engineering, and scientific fields, and many employers report difficulties filling specialized roles. The overall effect is a labor market where availability of workers varies considerably by region and industry. The third force is geographic mismatch. Job growth concentrates in metropolitan areas with high housing costs. Many workers live in regions where job creation is slower, wages stagnate, and industries shrink. Relocation rates in the United States have fallen to some of the lowest levels on record. High rents, childcare costs, transportation expenses, and uncertainty about long-term stability make moving less feasible for many households. The result is a landscape where jobs exist, but not always where workers are. Companies in certain cities report ongoing difficulty hiring, while workers in other regions struggle to find positions that match their skills. A fourth force involves sectoral imbalance. Some industries expand steadily. Healthcare continues adding tens of thousands of roles each month, driven by population aging and ongoing service demand. Leisure and hospitality maintain growth as travel normalizes. Government hiring remains consistent in many states. However, several office-based sectors, administrative support coordination roles, finance-adjacent work, and clerical functions show slow or stagnant job creation. Workers trained for these fields often face limited mobility. Their industries do not contract sharply, but they do not grow fast enough to absorb new entrants or provide upward movement for those already inside. This mismatch between worker training and future demand reinforces the sense of strain. Together, these forces interact with the dynamics described in earlier chapters. When demographics reduce labor supply, hiring becomes cautious. When immigration fluctuates, certain sectors tighten. When geographic mismatch deepens, jobs remain unfilled in one place while workers remain underemployed in another. When sectoral imbalance persists, workers struggle to transition into fields where opportunities are stronger. The overall labor market stays stable, yet movement inside it becomes more difficult. Households feel the pressure not through job loss, but through the narrowing of paths to advancement or transition. These structural shifts also influence long-term resilience. A workforce that grows slowly, relocates less, and concentrates in a limited set of expanding industries must absorb economic shocks differently. Regions dependent on shrinking sectors face prolonged stagnation. Younger workers encounter tighter competition for entry. Mid-career employees see fewer clear steps upward. Older workers face higher barriers to re-entry if displaced. None of this produces immediate turbulence in national indicators, but each adds weight to the lived reality of the job market. The root of today's labor landscape is not a crisis. It is a group of broad forces, demographic, immigration-based, geographic, and sectoral, that have been developing for years. They shift the structure of employment limit mobility and shape how workers experience opportunity. Understanding these forces is essential to understanding why the job market feels constrained even when the numbers remain steady. 8. How households can navigate a tighter job market. But we cannot stay in this position forever, can we? Workers want fuller wallets, steady jobs, and real opportunity in a market that keeps moving. That is why before ending this video, I want to share a clear view of what households can do now to remain resilient and continue developing in a labor market that has fundamentally changed. The first step is recognizing that stability today looks different from stability a decade ago. Employment remains high, but career movement is slower. Workers should plan with longer timelines in mind. Job searches take more weeks. Promotions arrive later. Transitions between roles require broader preparation. Accepting this pace helps families set realistic expectations and avoid unnecessary strain. The next step is orienting towards sectors that show consistent long-term demand. Healthcare continues adding tens of thousands of positions each month. Government roles remain steady in many states. Hospitality and local services regain strength as travel normalizes. Skilled trades face shortages in several regions. Technical roles tied to AI oversight, cybersecurity, and data quality expand gradually. These fields grow across economic cycles and rely less on the rapid hiring surges that define the post-pandemic years. Skill maintenance is another practical priority. Workers do not need dramatic reinvention, but steady updates matter. Basic competency with AI-assisted tools improves efficiency in many office roles. Clear communication, judgment, and coordination remain essential as these are functions automation handles poorly. Short certifications rather than long academic programs often provide the most direct return. Incremental skill building keeps workers aligned with evolving workplace expectations. Job seekers benefit from widening their search radius and entering processes early. Hiring moves at a slower rhythm, so starting sooner reduces pressure. A broader search captures openings that do not appear in national statistics but matter at the local level. Part-time or temporary roles can serve as bridges in tighter periods and offer access to employers who prioritize internal hiring once workers are already inside the system. For mid-career and older workers, documentation of experience becomes important. Employers respond well to clear records of processes, outcomes, and problem-solving history. This helps counter concerns about training speed or adaptability. Public sector opportunities or healthcare-adjacent roles often offer more predictable pathways than highly competitive office-based fields. Preparing financially for longer re-entry times reduces disruption if displacement occurs. Families should also anticipate that living costs will continue to pressure budgets. Rent insurance, utilities, and childcare have risen steadily in recent years. Budgeting for these categories with built-in buffers prevents sudden strain. Younger workers in the household may take longer to secure stable roles, so shared planning eases the transition from education to full-time employment. Above all, households should treat mobility as a source of strength. Geographic mobility, even at a modest scale, expands job options. Skill mobility broadens the range of sectors a worker can enter. Financial mobility through savings, multiple income channels, or reduced debt adds resilience during slow hiring periods. None of these actions guarantee fast advancement, but they improve stability in a labor market that rewards flexibility and preparation. The job market has not broken, but it has tightened. It asks more from workers while offering slower movement in return. By adjusting expectations, aligning with strong sectors, strengthening adaptable skills, and planning with patience, households can keep pace with a system that is stable yet constrained. The job market we have walked through is not simple, and it is not gentle. Many families feel the weight of slower hiring, rising costs, and a workplace that asks for more clarity, more skills, and more patience than before. These pressures are real, and they shape daily decisions in ways that numbers alone cannot show. Yet even in a tightened system, movement is still possible. The economy continues to create work in sectors that matter. Communities adapt, and tools that once felt distant now become part of everyday routines. The pace may be slower, but progress has not disappeared. If there is one message to carry after this video, it is this: stability today comes from understanding the landscape, adjusting in steady steps, and making choices that keep households resilient. The environment has changed, but the ability to adapt remains strong. With clear planning and realistic expectations, families can still build secure paths forward, not through sudden leaps, but through consistent, grounded direction.
This video does not promote division within the United States or encourage segregation. All content is presented for the purpose of exploration, analysis, and fostering discussion based on current events, public sentiment, and social trends. We fully respect the United States Constitution and all federal regulations. If today's analysis made you think, drop a comment so we can keep the conversations going. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you will never miss our next independent deep dive.